All right, today we're diving into the rule of Mengistu Haile Mariam, a name that's tied to one of the most intense periods in Ethiopia's history. We're going to look at the core ideas that really drove his regime and, well, the devastating impact they had. Let's get right into it. It all boils down to this one powerful sentence. Seriously, this wasn't just some off-the-cuff remark. This was his mission statement. It's the key that unlocks his entire philosophy of rule, and it really sets the stage for everything that came next. And that, of course, leads us to the big question for our whole discussion today. When a leader comes out and says that violence is a necessary tool, what's the end result? What actually gets built from a foundation like that? That's what we're here to figure out. To answer that question, we first have to get a handle on the ideology that was fueling those words. And that all starts with the first pillar of his power. So that first pillar was the ideological framework he put into place, a Marxist dictatorship. You can think of this as the political engine that was driving the entire country. So what does a system like this actually look like on the ground? Well, it means you have one single party with absolute control over, well, everything. The government, the military, the economy, it's all under state control. And, a system that demands total control also demands total, unquestioning loyalty from its people. Which brings up a pretty big question, right? If your entire ideology is built on the idea of total control, how exactly do you enforce that? An idea that powerful needs an equally powerful tool to make it a reality. And that tool of enforcement had a name, the Red Terror. Now, this wasn't some unfortunate side effect of the revolution. This was the main strategy. It was a method used to cement power and get rid of any and all opposition. This was that ideology being put into brutal, terrifying practice. It's interesting to see how terror can become a systematic process. Look at this. It starts pretty simply. You identify anyone who thinks differently than you politically. Then you don't debate them. You suppress them with force. That creates this constant feeling of fear, which is then used to enforce loyalty. And it all culminates in the most visible and brutal step, public executions, which serve as a very clear warning to everybody else. And that whole process we just walked through, that is what revolutionary violence looks like in action. It's the direct, hands-on application of Mengistu's maxim. It's taking that belief that violence is a necessary tool of the state and turning it into a step-by-step plan. But an ideology and a method don't exist in a vacuum. They have consequences. And beyond the direct political violence, the regime's policies came at a staggering human cost. Which brings us to our third and final pillar, the absolutely devastating famine that happened as a result of these policies. And right here you can see this just tragic disconnect. On one hand, the stated goal of the policy was to have the state control all agriculture and all food distribution. I mean, that lines up perfectly with the ideology, right? But the reality for the people, the actual human outcome, was a widespread and catastrophic famine, a direct consequence of that rigid top-down control. Okay, so let's tie all of this together. The legacy of Mengistu's rule can really be understood as an iron fist, and that fist was built on three distinct but deeply connected pillars. And here they are, laid out plain and simple. You've got the ideology, the Marxist dictatorship that demanded total control. You've got the method, the Red Terror, which was used to enforce that control with violence. And finally, you have the consequence, the famine policies that grew out of that rigid system. Put them all together, and you have the iron fist of the regime. And all of this leaves us with one final and I think really important question to think about. When you look back at the ideology, the methods, and the heartbreaking outcomes, it really forces you to ask, whenever a leader decides that violence is a necessary part of change, who is it that really pays the ultimate price for that belief?